Hello, everyone. Thank you, Peggy. You know, this is not my first time in Idaho. This is not my first time in Boise. I have been here one time previously, and when we're all done here, I am going up to Sun Valley and Ketchum as Peggy's guest. And knowing her background as a comedy writer in Hollywood, I know we're going to have a great, great time. So, you know, the energy in this room for the past 2 days has been absolutely incredible. And today, in many, many conferences, often, you know, people get tired. And after a while, you know, you're just getting tired. But the energy in this room is like going up. And Janice kicked it up a notch, and Hattie kicked it up a notch, and no pressure on me, right, Tracy, to sort of like wrap it up and bring them home. But you know, as I was thinking about that, I was wondering, how many of the people in this room have ever done or still do yoga? And how about my favorite, Bikram yoga? Any Bikrams out there? Well, then you know what I mean when I say to you, I see the light in you. I feel the light in you. And you give me a turbocharge of energy to get out there and keep working. It is an incredible privilege to be the person that's supposed to like wrap up this remarkable conference. And of course, I want to thank Peggy for that great introduction, but also Tracy Andrus, the new chair of the Andrus Center for Public Policy. And you know, Tracy, I know that these have been some bittersweet days for you. And you and I are really just getting to know each other. But we share a very powerful bond, and that is the bond of girls who not only were blessed to have a wonderful father, but also a father who turned out to be a mentor for us, and that we had the privilege of working side by side with. And I know that you learned your political skills from an absolute master. And if you take a look at that other picture up there, that little one in the bonnet is me at 1 year old, sitting on my broadcasting father's lap, getting my very first look at a microphone. You know, and I know that you all know that that expression, age before beauty. But I would say to you that that's not the case today, because I've done my calculations and I am clearly the oldest of the keynote speakers here today. But you know what? I don't mind that. I don't mind at all, because I know that my job this afternoon is really to call on all of those years that I'm carrying, to give you three things. I want to give you, first of all, perspective. Perspective on, from my nearly 5 decades, on the front lines of women's steady march toward equality in this country and in the world, as an active participant, but also as a witness. And it doesn't mean that I have all the answers, because I am on this journey with you. Number two, I want to give you context of where we are today. We've heard some remarkable stories of incredible women, individual stories, and there are millions of those stories. And I would say that Susan B. Anthony and Eleanor Roosevelt and Geraldine Ferraro, they would all be pretty pleased with where we are today. But you know, I know that they would also be the very first ones to say to us, do not squat on our shoulders. Do not squat on the shoulders of millions of women who fought so hard and paid often a very high price for the opportunities and the rights that it's too easy for us to take for granted today. And I also hope that I can inspire everyone in this room to seize this moment in history, to tackle women's next frontier, because our next frontier is leadership. And oh yes, I promise to tell you a couple of stories. But first, before I talk about myself, I want to talk about all of you, because I want to remind you that you are the 1%. Highly educated, professionally seasoned, economically independent. Really part of a critical mass of women that the world has never seen the likes of, this critical mass. In my working lifetime, the United States has become what I call a nation of high achievers. There are now 3 very distinct generations of high-achieving women in the American workplace. And we've heard a bit of talk about some of these different generations, and in my book, I wrote a chapter on each one. You're all in this room. But we're very different. And the reason we're different is there's cultural reasons, there's natural reasons that we're different. But if we're going to help each other and finally begin, for the first time in history, to leverage our collective influence as half of the human race, then we need to understand each other. So let me introduce you, because I named them, and I thought it was the first generation I call the pioneering interlopers. Interloper. That word means impose yourself where you're not wanted. This is my generation. How many pioneering interlopers in this room? Right, you know what that is. But think Billie Jean King, tennis champion Billie Jean King, Sandra Day O'Connor, first woman on the Supreme Court, Maya Angelou. We grew up in this country being told from the times we were very little girls, no, you can't. No, you can't be a judge, be a CEO, be a senator, be a soldier, and oh, you certainly can't go in those sports locker rooms. We were kind of like the Marines, taking the professional beaches. We were often called men in skirts. You had to be pretty tough. You had to put on your flak jackets right out of college. But our mindset was get in, often where we were not wanted. Next group, the influential insiders. And actually, I should have moved that. Next group I call the influential insiders. Many of you are in this room today. You're in your 40s and 50s now. And think Sheryl Sandberg, of course. General Motors CEO Mary Barra, Michelle Obama, Oprah. By the time you reached the workplace, things were starting to change. Culture was changing a bit. Your generation had more law degrees, more MBAs, first women in the military academies. And thanks to Title IX, you had the opportunity that we never had to begin playing competitive sports. The message that you had when you were entering the workplace was, well, if you're really good, maybe you can. But the other problem with that was there was only one seat at that table for the woman, and it often pitted women against one another for that one seat. And the mindset of the influential insiders, naturally, after the Marines come the diplomats. So your mindset was very much fit in. So if you ever said, or you heard someone saying, I'm no feminist, but sure want those jobs those nasty pioneering interlopers we're fighting for, you're talking to an influential insider. And the third one, of course, are our millennials. I call them the I'll do it my way innovators. Of course, you're in your early 30s and the trailing edge now, just coming out of college and the graduate schools. They've been in the workplace now about 10 years. I think of actress and UN activist Emma Watson, Alicia Keys, race car driver Danica Patrick. I love Danica Patrick's line. She said, I wasn't raised to be the fastest girl. I was raised to be the fastest driver. So the innovators grew up with the message, yes, you can. You can do absolutely anything. Lots of female role models. Social media and new technology masters. First generation of women in this country has more college degrees than their male peers. Yeah. The mindset, of course, is I'm in. But that's because you've been cruising highways of opportunity that have already been paved. And the trick there is you haven't really had to learn to fight yet. And believe me, there is plenty of rough road ahead. So that's where we are right now, that we have a pipeline in the United States of America of incredible potential leaders ready and itching to lead. And yet we don't. Tracy gave you quite a good picture this morning in opening this conference of the statistics, of the fact that for all of our MBAs and our law degrees and our Olympic medals and even our Purple Hearts, for nearly 2 decades now, the middle keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and too few women are going anywhere we haven't already been. And that is really the great gender paradox of our time. And if you're not so sure about that, take a look at these numbers. We all know that women are 52% of the world's population. But did you know that women produce 66% of the world's output? We earn only 10% of the world's income, and we own only 1% of the world's property. And when I look at those numbers, I think to myself, and I wonder what percentage of the decisions that affect the entire human family and our precious planet are made by women, the mothers of the human family. To quote the eloquent words that Charlottesville's Heather Heyer wrote, if you are not outraged by those facts, you're not paying attention. So, right about now, you're probably sitting here going, who is this Ann Doyle from Michigan? And any Michiganders in this room? Any Michigan roots or anything? Come on, there's more than that. Michiganders are everywhere. But who is this Ann Doyle from Detroit anyway? And why is she so passionate about this whole topic of women and girls? Well, I'm the big sister of an Irish Catholic family. That's me in the front row there on the right. And, I grew up in the Midwest. I was blessed with absolutely fantastic parents, both of them college educated. I had a very independent mother who had a master's degree in the early 1940s, and also a father who respected her as an equal or better. And so we all got exactly the same messages about education and about achievement, the boys and the girls. And I can also tell you that my mother made doggone sure that my brothers pulled an equal share of the work around the house. But on top of that, I was also lucky enough to come of age in this country at a time of tremendous social change. It was a time of the civil rights movement and the women's movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement and the Indian movement were at their height of impact. And, the old rules were being challenged and new doors were cracking open. I graduated from undergraduate from the University of Michigan in 1972. That was also the first year that the first issue of Ms. Magazine was published. I marched and I worked hard, as you can see from that picture there, for passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. And I know exactly where I was standing when I heard that it failed in 1982. So I have been tested in some interesting leadership laboratories. As you heard, I began my career in journalism as a broadcast reporter all throughout the 70s and the 80s, which gave me a front row seat covering the dramatic changes that were going on in this country in terms of legal rights and economic opportunity for women and for people of color. As you heard, I moved over to the corporate world, and at Ford Motor Company, I helped to push up what we call in the auto industry the steel ceiling. I took an early retirement when my son was just moving into his teens. And at that time, I did something that I'd been telling other women to do for decades, which is run for office, run for office, run for office. And they finally said to me, why don't you stick your neck out there, Ann, and run for office? And so I did, and served on my city council. I'm also a mother, as you heard, and I pretty much have been a single mother. That's my son, Kevin, there. He's 24 years old today, and that's us at Niagara Falls, obviously on a bad hair day for me. But, you know, and I'm a mother who had to sit a little 7-year-old boy down and tell him that his father had died. So all of those pieces, though, are shaped who I am. And I am one example of a whole generation of women who know the joy of riding a powerful wave of women's progress. And I also know how hard it is. And everybody always wants to hear about the locker rooms, and so I'll tell you a little story about it. But I have to tell you that I didn't seek that. But when it came to me, and the year was 1978, when it came to me, I knew that it was mine to do, that it had to be done, and I was in a position to have the credentials and to be able to do it. And I actually had been working in television news for almost 10 years at that point, and I was working out in Los Angeles, and I wanted to come home to Detroit. And so I was applying for TV news jobs and staying at my parents' house. And the CBS affiliate in Detroit said, you know, we like your stuff, we like your video, we'd really like to hire you, but we just don't have a news job right now. So how about doing sports? And I looked at the news director and I said to him, I'm going to have to think about that. Then I went home and had dinner with my parents that night, because my dad at that time was the president of the Detroit Sports Broadcasters Association. And so, you know, we're sitting there at dinner, and of course your dad and mom say, well, hey, how'd the job interviewing go today, Annie? And I said, well, good, I got offered a job at Channel 2. And good. And I said, yeah, but they want me to do sports. And my dad literally like stopped mid-bite. And he looked at me and he said, really? And I said, yeah. He said, you take that job. And I said, yeah, but Dad, if I take this job, I'm going to have to get into this whole sports locker room thing. Because I was a news reporter, I knew that there was a lawsuit working its way right up to the Supreme Court. There weren't very many women doing sports anywhere. But there was a test case going up to the Supreme Court. And I knew, and my dad, that it would be very, very controversial. And my dad said to me, absolutely, if you don't take that job in sports, you will never have any credibility as a sports reporter. I did take that job. And I never knew it until later, but my dad took a lot of heat. He took a lot of heat from his male peers because they feared that the teams would never let the women in those locker rooms, and that if the court said you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex, they would basically stop the men from going in too. And so many of his peers told him, and I found out this later, not from him, that, you know, Vince, you have got to stop her because she's going to wreck it for all of us. And, you know, what my dad basically said was, you know, I haven't really been able to control her since she was 5 years old, so there's really like nothing I can do about this. And he never said anything to me. And so it was really important, you know, to have a father who was a sports broadcaster to mentor me through those very, very difficult days. And it's another thing also, an important piece, to have the courts rule, which they finally did, that you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. But I will also tell you, it's another thing entirely to be a young rookie reporter, female reporter, standing outside a locker room, practically hyperventilating, as you force yourself to walk through those doors and to face whatever is waiting for you on the other side. And oh yes, there were some interesting things waiting for me on the other side. And you can read about those in my book. But you know, as important as those tests were in shaping who I am, the true fire in my belly is my sister Mary. And that's Mary and me making mud pies. And I'm 5 and she's 2 in that picture. And in the other picture, that's my dad and Mary dropping me off at the University of Michigan. And the confident-looking one in the dress, that's my sister Mary. But just a couple of years after that picture was taken, my sister Mary got up one morning while all of us were asleep. And she went downstairs, and she walked outside, and she went into the garage, and she turned on the car. And she took a sleeping bag, and she lay down by the exhaust pipe, and she pulled that sleeping bag over her head, and she took deep breaths of that toxic air. And by the time we found her, Mary was gone. You wonder, why would I tell you a story like that, such a sad story, at a day when my hope here is to inspire you? I tell you that story so that you understand why I care so deeply. Because when I see women and girls denied legal rights or economic opportunity, abused, sexually trafficked, disrespected, ignored, they are all Marys to me. And when a woman asks me for help, if I possibly can, my answer is always going to be yes. My passion for this topic has taken me all over the world, to every continent, including for some really interesting assignments for the State Department. And one of the most interesting assignments was when they asked me to go to Saudi Arabia. And of course my answer was yes. I was kind of surprised when they wanted me to go to Saudi Arabia and talk about women's leadership. And of course my answer was yes. But I asked to speak on the phone before I went with some of the people there who wanted me to come, including the head of a women's university there. And I said to Dr. Ahmadi, I said, you know, what can I possibly say to your girls? And she said to me simply, Ann, just give them hope. And so I told the women of Saudi Arabia, and you probably heard that just this week they announced that finally women in Saudi Arabia had one small step forward for their womankind, that they're going to be able to drive. When she's told me, just give them hope, I talked to those girls, and you know what? I told them about the American suffragettes who fought for 75 years, including chaining themselves to the White House fence and being beaten and imprisoned so that we could have the right to vote. I told them about Rosie the Riveters, who ran the farms and the factories in our country during World War II. And I told them about the feminist activists of the 60s and the 70s, Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and Coretta Scott King. And when I told them all of those stories, I was full of confidence and hope of the momentum that was building for women in my own country and around the world. But I have to say to you, as I stand here today, now I need hope. I need hope because, as we've heard today, and I hope you have a really clear understanding of this, our progress has been glacial for 2 decades now in terms of making any kind of change, in terms of the percentage of women on corporate boards, in terms of closing the pay gap. And the sexually hostile frat boy work environments that women are still facing, not just in Rust Belt manufacturing work environments, but in Silicon Valley and in network newsrooms. And because there is growing evidence that American women have not only lost forward momentum, we are in free fall compared to our global sisters. And if that surprises you, take a look at this. The Global Gender Gap Report is an index which measures equality of men and women in 144 developed countries. It's published each fall. It's respected globally. It's published at the World Economic Forum at Davos. And for the first 9 years, the US was in the top 20. You know, we're not leading the world, the Scandinavian countries were, in terms of gender equality between men and women. And, but in 2015, the United States dropped to 23rd in the world. And last fall, we dropped to number 45. And the irony also, the most perplexing piece of this, is that we are number 1 in the world in terms of education equality between males and females. But we lag in so many categories, including we are 78th in the percentage of women in national political office. And I have to say that no authentic discussion of women's leadership could be authentic if we didn't take a minute to think about and acknowledge the reality check of our presidential election. The reality check, it just gave us about the very different standards that male and female leaders are still held to. And also about how conflicted our nation still is about women and power. When I see women and feel women losing momentum, it hurts my soul. So when I get down, I get on a horse. And I've been riding since I was a little girl. And you know, you'll find in my book an entire chapter called Get Back in the Saddle. It is my favorite rallying cry about picking yourself up after setbacks and failure and dusting yourself off and charging right back into the fray. But you know what? It's not always as easy as it sounds. And I know that from personal experience too. Because a little over a year ago, I took one of the worst falls of my life. It was one of those Christopher Reeves kind of falls, and I went right over the horse and landed on my head and in the emergency room. Now, luckily, I didn't suffer any permanent damage, or I wouldn't be standing here today talking to you. But I will say that it shook me to my core. I lost my confidence. And that little voice that women are all too familiar with started in on me. Well, Ann, maybe you're too old. Maybe you should really stop riding. Maybe the risks aren't worth the rewards. There is some new McKinsey research that just came out this year that says one of the biggest differences now between ambitious, equally qualified men and women is how quickly they come back from setbacks. How quickly, maybe after being passed over for a promotion or losing that election or not making the team, you go right back into the fray. And they know from the research that most men shake it off much more quickly than women. And I would say to you, if you believe you are leadership material, you must get back in the saddle. Get back there quickly. And even Hillary Clinton, most recently, has said, I don't want anyone to be discouraged by my defeat. We can't give up trying. I submit to you that it is time for American women to get back in the saddle and regain the momentum that we have lost. So I'm going to leave you with 3 mantras that really have helped me overcome gender bias throughout my life, whether it's my own self-doubt, that little voice that women have inside, whether it's that, or whether it's external bias that is absolutely alive and well. So the first one came from my dad. My dad had three very simple words, and he told them to all of his 7 children: never eliminate yourself. And the way he would explain it to us was, you know what? The world is a very competitive place. And if you are not the best one for the job, the best one for the office, whatever you're going after, you will be eliminated. And you've heard this a number of times today and yesterday. But these little simple words are, if you don't go for it, you have eliminated yourself. Never, ever eliminate yourself. And if you're wondering about it, ask yourself, what would Wonder Woman do? And I think that she would most definitely agree with my dad. Because despite all of our achievements, I just see American women still hampered by this minority mindset that makes us accept the status quo because we have been culturally trained to be passive about the status quo. So when that little voice starts telling you, be careful, or who do you think you are, or maybe you're not ready, tell yourself, never eliminate yourself. Next one, embrace power. When I was working on my book, one of the many incredible leaders I interviewed was Kim Campbell, who was the first female Prime Minister of Canada. And she said to me, I love power. I want it. I'm power hungry. Not for myself, but because when I have power, I can accomplish things. And she said to me, Anne, tell women, don't disdain power. You must embrace it as the essential currency for getting things done. We as women have been raised from the time we're little girls to, if we're pretty enough or if we're smart enough, we will be invited. We will be noticed. We will be rewarded. No one is going to invite you or me to the leadership dance. We must invite ourselves, and we must invite other women. And we do that by embracing power. Get comfortable with it. And third, we need to start practice sistering. The only way we are ever going to achieve equality is by leveraging our collective clout. And that requires sistering one another. Now, if you know anything about construction, you know that that's a very active term used today. Sistering is all about strengthening structural beams by adding additional support. Throughout history, women have a long, long record of sistering men into positions of power and leadership. It is long past time for us to start sistering one another, to take our equal places alongside men. So if you only remember one thing that I told you today, I hope it's this quote from the wonderful Melinda Gates. And she basically says, women speaking up for themselves and those around them is the strongest force we have to change the world. You know, my generation of pioneering interlopers, we are rapidly moving into the third act of our lives. The torch of women's progress is ready to be passed to the next generations. I ask you to take it joyfully and run with it. And dream bigger and run faster and aspire higher than we ever imagined we could. And I say to you, start by looking around this room. This has been a remarkable 2 days. And look around this room, your strongest allies for taking what you have heard for these 2 days and not parking it somewhere, but making it alive in your life. Your strongest allies are sitting all around you. So make sure that you take these allies and strengthen your sisterhood. And one of the things that I think you can do to start doing that, do your homework, is to go see the Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs Battle of the Sexes movie. It comes out tomorrow. And, you know, it will remind you who weren't born yet or not old enough yet to have lived through the power of that, how hard others fought to get us where we are. But also it will give you a really joyful jolt of adrenaline that you are going to need for the challenges that are awaiting you. Because it is time for American women to regain our sense of urgency and tackle this next frontier of leadership. You know it's going to happen. My challenge to you is don't leave it for other generations. And if you do it well, it will be your legacy. And I want to end by asking you to do one thing more, and that is to join me in Susan's incredible chant. And that is, can we do it together? Let's stand up. All right. Are we ready? Okay, we're going to be loud, proud, passionate. One more time. Loud, proud, and passionate. Go power up.
Showtime. I would probably, please, I'm sure you got a lot of questions, and I know some of them have to do with what was on the other side of that locker room door. And maybe yes, maybe no. Well, let's see if she's going to go further. But I mentioned earlier that, you know, my whole life is references to a movie. But when I first joined the Andrus board, my son called me on the phone, and he said, "Mom, does anybody know who Anita Hill is these days?" And I said, "Well, people of our generation certainly do, and people who are younger should. Why?" "Well, filmmakers made a movie about her, and I just wonder if you think anybody will go." And I said, "I'm prejudiced, but if you release this film, Peter, it's in the Family of Women Film Festival." So it was, and as it turned out, I didn't know. I knew the filmmaker who lives in Sun Valley part of the year. But I was able to bring Frida and the film to be part of the Women in Leadership Conference. And what we found out is that everybody did know who Anita Hill was because she was now in the gender studies, all the gender studies courses, and that over 20 years, it was interesting the comments that we got about the subject of he said, she said, and, you know, who believes a woman? You know, that whole attitude had changed, but this is all to the point of another film that when Battle of the Sexes was brought up, there was, our generation once again knew about it, but we didn't get that awareness, and somehow I got a feeling that this wasn't cited, and you and I were talking about it, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about, the broader implications of the importance of that tennis match?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll ask this audience, how many people in this audience remember watching that match? Right. How many people in this audience really aren't sure what that's about? Maybe you heard a little bit about it, but really aren't sure. Right. Well, the thing that I would say to you is I hope everyone in this room will go see that movie, because that movie was a defining moment in American gender history. And let me put it in this context. It happened on September 20th, 1993, which is why they're releasing it here in September. September 20th, 1993. I looked up the population of the United States at that time. It was 213. 90 million Americans watched that match. There were only 3 pretty much big channels back then, okay? And it was on national television. 90 million Americans watched that match. And it was an incredible, and it raged for a long time, which the movie will capture, sort of the joyful battle between men and women. Because here was this man, Bobby Riggs, who had a great sense of humor, and he made a whole lot of fun about it and thought we could make some money about the fact that any man who can play tennis can pretty much beat the greatest woman tennis player in the world. And this really kind of gets back to our other speaker, Natasha, talking about that. And so Billie Jean King, to accept, many people told her, don't play him. You have everything to lose. You are the #1 women's champion in the world. You have everything to lose. Don't play him. But Billie Jean King knew that if she could beat that sucker, that it would be a defining moment in terms of women's respect for themselves and men's respect for, maybe women can play tennis pretty well. And she had to be incredibly mentally tough, not only physically to be a great tennis player, but the mental toughness. And it was a joyful moment when she beat him. And she not only beat him, she beat him in straight sets. And it gave American women a jolt of respect and courage that really carried us for the rest of that decade in terms of our yes we can momentum to keep moving forward that I feel we've lost. And that's why I hope you'll go see it, because I want to live long enough to see all of you feel that joy and feel the collective power of women on the move again.
Great answer. Based on the world statistics that you were talking about earlier, and I have 2 questions on this subject. The first one is, what do you think is contributing to the current drop in gender equality in the U.S.?
Yeah, and the important thing about this, I mean, there are many, many, many pieces to this puzzle, and you've heard a lot of the research of what's happening in a number of different industries, and in terms of we're either not gaining ground or actually losing ground. And and in terms of that global gender gap, it measures equality between men and women in terms of, and there's many, many categories, but big categories in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of economic opportunity, and in terms of political empowerment. Those big pieces. And part of it is the fact that for a long time, we did lead the world. And that was a big piece of it was because of our education, that our people were so, literate and well-educated ahead of many, many other countries for a long time. But other countries are really catching up. And so part of it is that other countries are really on the move and advancing, and another part of it is that we have stopped. And there's a lot of feeling that everything's okay, everything's fine. No, it's not. No, it's not. And so I think the first step is always to understand where we are, and then if you believe we should do something about it, let's get going again.
So here's the flip side with another question. So what is it that the Scandinavian countries in particular are doing to close the gender gap, in your opinion?
Yeah, and you know what? There's not a nation in the world where men and women are equal in terms of all those categories. Nobody in the world. I mean, this deeply ingrained gender bias goes back thousands and thousands of years. But the Scandinavian countries, I mean, legitimately, they're much smaller countries. Much easier to get your arms around it, you know, and in terms of sort of culturally pretty similar. You know, we have such tremendous, and we're so big, and we have so many differences. It's easier for them in some ways. But they also have, I mean, their education system is incredible. They value teachers, they pay them well. But they also have incredible, in terms of the parenting and child care, you know, they pay men and women to take paternity leave. And I had an au pair from Sweden who lived with us for a year, one of our favorite au pairs, and he said, well, Ann, it's not mandatory that the fathers have to take paternity leave, but you're paid to do it. So why would you not take 6 weeks of paid leave as a father? And they would either, okay, you want to keep working, well, you forfeit all this money and this opportunity to stay home. So that's one of the big pieces that they have done.
Okay, now I knew we were going to get several questions in this area, and this is one that they're all sort of come in sort of a neutral position asking for explanations, and this is politically, in your opinion, I'm sure, how do you explain how many women voted for Trump beside disrespectful remarks toward and about women?
Is it safe to answer this question in this room? This takes courage, right? Is that right? If you know the facts about the numbers in terms of what happened in our election, the reality that was really big shock for me, and it was hard for me to accept, and I don't totally understand it yet, and I want to. But the fact is that women of color supported people of color, so let's just talk women, supported Hillary Clinton in gigantic numbers, okay? African American women who voted, 94% voted for Hillary Clinton. Hispanic women who voted, 68% voted for Hillary Clinton. Of white women, 54% went Trump. Now, I had an African American woman, I'm from Detroit, and I have a lot of friends, and the African American friends, and I've really been asking them to try to understand this. And they said to me, you know, Ann, we weren't surprised, but we wondered about that too, because they said, as they put it, if a sister was going for a job like that or a leadership role, she would have had to be really bad for us not to have supported her. And so in a situation like that, when I say, okay, when one person who happens to be female is so incredibly qualified, and the other person is so not ready, why? Why would you make this decision? And I don't know the total answer to that. But as a white woman, there's something I don't understand that I want to understand. And I think it gets to this big issue of women supporting other women. And if you want to be measured for your ability to move into leadership roles, and if you believe women should be in leadership roles, well then, when qualified women stick their necks out there, don't leave them hanging out there. Don't leave them hanging out there. You have to have their backs. And I want to quote Gail. Gail and I were talking about this, Captain. She and I were talking a little bit about this. And she said she had a friend who brought up something about Hillary Clinton that we've all heard for years and years and years. Well, I just hate her because she stayed with her husband, and she should have left him, and she stayed with that cheating man. And I believe Gail said to her friend, well, how do you feel about Eleanor Roosevelt? And how do you feel about Jackie Kennedy? Well, I really like those women. And there is that whole piece about who knows what goes on in marriages. Only the husband and the wife knows what goes on in marriages. But I always felt about Hillary that she had no problem taking care of Bill behind those doors. And whatever worked out between them, that was their problem. But I thought the example about holding that against another woman when we have such deep respect for someone like Eleanor Roosevelt or Jackie Kennedy, I don't know. But I think we do know that there's something about women in terms of, well, I just don't like her, I just don't trust her, I just don't, we have to, you don't have to like everybody in order to support them and in order to work with them. And I think men do a much, much better job of doing business with, getting along with, fighting with, working with, and understanding that if they're going to rise, they got to help each other. And I don't think women have figured that out yet. And I have an expression that I say is that every woman for herself is a losing strategy. You got to help each other.
Yeah, what you just said in a politically context that men in a workplace, I assume, can also hold their noses and work with the son of a bitch, so they have to. You think women are encountering that same mindset of making, perhaps a very accurate judgment about somebody as a snake, but they choose not to try to find a way to live with it anyway so they can move forward. Does that apply equally?
Now, wait a minute. Let me make sure I understand this.
You're talking politically that women say, well, there's just something about her I don't
Well,
like.
I think it not just politically, it plays out there.
But in the workplace, is that hampering women, in your opinion?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I don't understand this. If anyone has some insight on this, because I'm really trying to figure it out. And it's cultural. It's all cultural. It's all evolutional. And so I just want us not to stand still. Just keep evolving, keep moving. And the fact is that women in gigantic numbers have not been in the workforce for that long. My lifetime. That's not a long time. And it's still very much, these are workforces. I saw that actually Melinda Gates, I think, just said it, that we are sending our daughters into workplaces designed for men. And so, we really have to sort of adjust in many, many ways. But one of the things about men working together is they've learned this for generations and probably been taught it. Whereas women coming in, and when we first were coming in, we were competing with other women for that one seat at the table. There was one job for that woman, and you were my competition. I certainly wasn't going to help you. Whereas we need to understand, no, everybody is your competition. The men are also your competition. But we have to help each other. So I think it's evolutionary, but I think it begins with being conscious about this. And you don't have to like her, but if you see qualified women, whether you like her or not, she doesn't have to be your best friend. If you see qualified women, mentor them if they're younger than you, and if they're ahead of you, and in leadership, support them. Support them. And that means when you hear people talking about them or criticizing them or unjustly or whatever, speak up for them. Actively support them.
Okay, I have another political question that I think that I want to support women's rights, but I struggle voting for women candidates with whose politics I disagree. What do you suggest I do?
Okay, and you know what, it would be fantastic if we could have women on both sides of the aisle. I don't really want this to be about one party. But if you say you support women's rights, then make sure you look at the policies that that candidate supports. You know, and so if the candidate and maybe the party that's holding their feet to the fire in terms of how they're voting is not supporting things that help women advance and have equal rights, then I don't know how you can just sort of support somebody because you say you believe in that party. I mean, if you truly believe in women's rights, then I would say look carefully at the positions. And it's not just one position. It's not just one position, but there's lots of positions. So don't make it maybe a one-issue decision.
So you're meeting on the local level, moving up, and when more women see that they're women with their backs who vote, it will have more importance in influencing whole platforms on different levels.
Well, we know that the biggest thing that we can do to help advance women is to get more women into political office. There's several reasons for that. One is obviously because they influence laws, and this is everywhere, you know, at the local level, state, federal, everywhere. They influence the laws, of course, that affect important decisions that happen to our lives. But number two is they're very visible. So you can have women in corporate positions, Mary Barr at General Motors or something, but they're not as visible publicly as women in political office. And so we need to see people in those positions. Men need to see women there, and women and little girls and young women, you know, need to see people there. So that's one of the very biggest things that we know that we can do. And you know, I had Peggy and Tracy and a number of us here, are part of the International Women's Forum. There are International Women's Forum members here from Idaho, too, which I want to say hello to. And it's a powerful network of women leaders. And I received an email about 10 days ago from someone who was in the parliament in Turkey. And she was coming to Detroit, and she wanted to meet with me. And so, of course, I said, yes, I would meet with her. But we were talking about that. So 20% of the members of parliament in Turkey are women. We have 17%. Okay? So we have 20 women senators out of 100, and we have 85 members of the House out of 435. And if you know anything about the research, you have got to get to 33.33% of any kind of a group before you even start changing the conversation. When I was with Ford Motor Company, we bought Mazda. How much did we buy? We bought 33.33%. Why? So they could shape the decisions. They didn't buy 29%, they didn't buy 20%, they didn't buy 17%. So we know from research that until a minority group gets to 33.33% of that bigger group, you don't even change the conversation, let alone the decisions. In terms of a board of directors, 1 is a token, 2 is a presence, 3 is a voice. We got to get the numbers up, and that means more women running for office. And we know that when women run, they win pretty much the same as men. Problem is they don't run. So we need more women to run for office, and run yourself. Tell somebody you know that she should run, and get out there and help those women get elected. Because it will mean better outcomes. You know the research? It'll mean better outcomes for everybody.
Great. Thank you, Ann Doyle.